All right, let's get a real look at the inflation number from yesterday. It came in hotter than expected. The Fed's target is 2% inflation. The estimates were for 3.0, came in at 3.1. And now I hear Chuck Schumer of the U.S. Senate trying to coin the phrase Trumpflation. Guy was in office for 10 days in January. E.J. Antoni is an economist for the Heritage Foundation. He's on KCMO. And even though he's an Eagles fan, we're letting him on the show because he's so good at what he does. EJ, good morning. Is Trumpflation really going to stick?
I don't think so, honestly. I mean, this is just so unbelievably laughable. The really crazy thing here is that the people who make claims like this don't even understand the data that they're referencing. They did the exact same thing, with the jobs report, for example. And that report is actually composed of data that is taken from surveys which were conducted during the month of January before Trump even took office. Likewise, for this inflation report, nearly all of the data that goes into this report was collected before Trump even took office. So this idea that somehow these reflect prices because of Trump policies that still haven't even been put into place yet, I mean, it's just so absolutely laughable.
So when you look at the inflation number yesterday, what do you think the answer is? Because it did come in hotter than expected. We know the administration is trying to obviously get that number down as quickly and effectively as possible. What do they need to be doing more of, or what should they be thinking about?
Well, a lot of things, most of which is just simply reversing what we saw the last administration do. And let's not forget the fact that the Federal Reserve last fall, in what I thought was an unprecedented move of election interference, they started cutting rates right before a presidential election. And the goal there was to try to get their preferred candidate across the finish line. But once they did that, inflation started ticking up again. And sure enough, if you look at these annual inflation rates, every single month since the Fed started cutting interest rates, the inflation rate has been heading back up. So there's a direct link there.
All right. Now, one of the big things that increased the number for inflation was rent. I think I saw it was up double digits over the last year. One of our congressmen here in the Kansas City area, his name is Emanuel Cleaver. He had a post the other day or yesterday talking about inflation, and he said here housing is the number one driver, which is why affordable housing must be a bipartisan priority in Congress. He says Republicans are more focused on doing the bidding of corporate landlords rather than lowering the cost for working class families. How would you respond to Emanuel Cleaver?
Well, the market already provides an incentive for people to produce affordable housing. Look, if you're going to create housing, right, if you're going to build homes or even build apartments, what incentive do you have to make them affordable? Well, if they're not affordable, then no one buys them, no one rents them, and you don't make any money. So the market provides an incentive for you to make things affordably. And just as you're making housing, someone else is as well, and you're going to have to compete with them, and you're going to undercut each other, and that helps drive down prices. Competition is great for the consumer. The problem with housing today has nothing to do with the lack of competition on the market's part. It has to do with government essentially strangling that competition with regulatory red tape, making it increasingly expensive to build homes. Most people don't realize this, but the Biden administration, just through regulatory maneuvers, added tens of thousands of dollars to the cost of building a home. That gets directly passed on to the consumer. But on top of that, you also had a Federal Reserve manipulating interest rates, driving them down to zero to essentially facilitate government spending and borrowing of money. But then they had to raise interest rates to help fix the inflation that the low interest rates caused. And the result of that was violent swings in the housing market where people are now locked into homes. They got mortgage rates at 2 or 3%, for example, and now they can't sell their home because they'll lose that and get stuck with a 7% mortgage interest rate. And that means that they're going to see things like their monthly mortgage payment double. People can't afford that. So you have this huge squeeze on the supply of new homes, a squeeze on the supply of existing homes. And the result is that there's just not enough supply on the market. That's driving up price, and that's creating an affordability crisis, probably the worst in 4 decades.
What about DOGE and how much, potentially cutting government spending And you heard Elon talk about this the other day. If we can cut the budget deficit to $1 trillion from $2 trillion, I mean, or you're just naturally going to see inflation come down. He's hoping for 0% inflation in 2026. How realistic of an economic model do you think that is, EJ Antoni?
Oh, it's completely realistic. And in fact, it's not just realistic. I think that should be the expectation. That should be the goal. Folks need to realize Doge is a very small operation that has only been working a few days. In other words, they have just scratched the surface. This is the tip of the iceberg. And every time they turn over another rock, they're finding more and more corruption. They're finding more fraud, more abuse, more waste. And so they need to keep going. They need to be allowed, I would say, unfettered access to all of the federal government, to all of our finances, so that they can essentially expose, they can make public everything that has been done ostensibly in your name, the taxpayer, with your money. And as we find more and more, we'll realize all of this money is a waste and doesn't need to be spent. And as you claw all of that back, you reduce government spending, you reduce government borrowing. And now all of a sudden there's no incentive for an institution like the Federal Reserve to monetize our nation's debt and to create inflation in the first place.
In the next minute or so, are you even surprised by how much Democrats are pushing back on Doge in particular, which is really something I think across the country would have bipartisan support, which is finding out where our tax dollars are being wasted? Are you surprised by their pushback on this?
Well, I guess what really surprises me is how blatant, how obvious they're being about it. I mean, you even had what's her face, like one crazy lady, Maxine Waters. I think it was the other day. She's talking about how we don't know what they're going to find on us. So you're telling us there's a lot to find on you? I mean,
yeah.
They are completely giving themselves up here, and so that is the thing I think that really surprises me. How essentially how open they're being about the fact that they don't want their own corruption exposed.
EJ Antoni does a great job for the Heritage Foundation. Find him on X at Real EJ Antoni, and we appreciate it, EJ. Thanks so much, and congrats to your Eagles, my man.
Oh, thank you. That's very gracious of you. Thank you, sir.
You bet. You bet. He's a good guy, and he's always a great guest. So